So, when you see this word, goat, there may be a variety of things that you think of. I mean, obviously, the more traditional view when you see this word would be this, right? Literally, goat. Now, as I was growing up, the word would also be used for somebody who, usually like in the sporting realm, who fumbled the ball, who made a big mistake that cost their team a game. It was a derogatory term, goat. They're the goat. But today, this term has come to mean something very different in the sports world. It's now used as an acronym for it's GOAT, greatest of all time. So when you think of GOAT, this would be, all of a sudden we've gotten so rowdy. We had such warm feelings down here, and now you've so quickly turned on me. I knew there was a chance I would alienate at least half of you, and the rest of you probably wouldn't care. But Brian's with me. So now this term has come to mean greatest of all time, and so I just couldn't resist, on the heels of his 6th Super Bowl championship, to show you what I think of when I hear the word GOAT. Should I leave that up there, or should we maybe go to that? All right, so in order not to completely take us off the rails, we're going to get away from Tom Brady for a little bit. And we're going to get away from sports, because that typically doesn't engender anything really positive, because there's always so many arguments about that. But we are going to talk about what greatness means. And what I want us to do in this conversation is I want us to think about let's put sports aside, what constitutes in your mind greatness. Now let me just say this before you give me some feedback. I do not want you to tell me what you think you should tell me. I want you to tell me in your innermost private thoughts about what you think greatness looks like and what you would aspire to be, because all of us are made for greatness. We all have greatness in us. We are made in the image of God. God desires that we move into the goodness and greatness that is in our creation. So we all want that, but I think sometimes we see and understand this word differently. I don't think we all see greatness the same way. So what I want you to do is, in your most honest moments, talk to me about what constitutes greatness for you. And don't tell me what you think the right answer should be. Tell me what greatness would mean to you. Okay?
Honesty. Integrity. Devoted. I mean, the conditional. Effort. I refer to that. Wow.
Boldness. Okay, let's stop there. So, when you're measuring, and I just want you to think about this, I don't want you to answer. You've given me a variety of things that you feel would constitute greatness. So when you're thinking about school and about what greatness looks like within the confines of your classroom or the athletic field, or in some construct as you're moving up. Those of you who are in high school, those of you who are in college, I want you to really think about what it would mean for you to be great. Okay? Because you think about it, whether or not you're conscious of it, you're thinking about what it means to be great. For those of you who have jobs and they're working, I want you to think about, in the confines of your job, what it would mean for you to be great. Great. Not just better than most, great. For those of you who are married, for those of you who have children, for those of you in whatever realm of your life, I want you to really begin to think about, what would it look like for me to be great? Because I think you were made for that. But I think our understanding of greatness isn't always the same understanding of greatness that Jesus gives us. And so what I want to make us do by the time we finish is, I just want our understanding aligned with His. Just so that if we differ, we know that, fine, so be it. But here's what Jesus says about what greatness looks like, and here's where I do. Do I want them aligned, or do I care? Okay? So, just before we read, now earlier Susan read to you the story that I'm going to unpack for you today. Some of you weren't here when she read, but she read this passage that comes out of Mark chapter 9. Now we don't know exactly, is my light working? There we go. I think my clicker's dying too. All right, so up here you see towards the top there's sort of a mountain range called Mount Hermon, which... Yes, thank you, Zach. It's right there. And then down a little bit, as we move underneath, near where Nazareth and the green is Mount Tabor. Okay, so we don't know which of those two mountain ranges that Jesus was on. It's speculated both just prior to this text. But He was on a mountain with three of His closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, and there was what they call the Mount of Transfiguration, where this supernatural miracle came, and these three witnessed this opportunity. And then once they had this experience with Jesus, they left down the mountain, they encountered this demon-possessed boy, and Jesus delivered him from his possession. And so I say that just to say, whether it was Mount Hermon or whether it was Mount Tabor, they're now going to make their way to Capernaum, which is just towards the top of the Sea of Galilee, right in the middle, sort of top third of the map. Exactly, right there. Now, does anybody, just sort of as a quiz, you get sort of a gold star bonus points, does anybody know anything about Capernaum? Anybody know anything about this place? This was Jesus' home base. This was the place that He sort of camped out. He always came back to. It was a little fishing village. There wasn't much to it. But there was something significant that happened. It was in this town, along this shore, that He told Andrew and Peter, who was then Simon, James and John, to drop their nets and to come follow me. It was also the very same town where He asked Matthew to leave his tax collecting booth. It's where He got 5 of His 12 disciples, Capernaum, this small, lazy sort of fishing town. And so here He is in Mark chapter 9, and He is leaving this great Mount of Transfiguration, this experience where He's delivered this young man from demon possession. And He begins to tell His disciples for the second time that He's moving towards death, that He's going to die. It's a very solemn moment. It's a very critical moment. He will tell them this 3 times, chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 10 of Mark. This is the second time. Now, last week, if you weren't here, as He told His disciples this very thing, what happened? What was the response of one of His disciples? Does anybody remember?
No way I'm going to let you die.
So Peter, one of those who was closest to Him, didn't really think that this was a good idea and didn't really think that this was going to happen. And he basically rebuked Jesus and told him, stop it already. Look at all of these crowds. Look at your rising popularity. Don't you see how good things are going? This is not on my agenda. And Jesus says to Peter, get behind me, Satan, which is a little harsh, but, right? So now for the second time, he's telling them again, okay? You didn't hear it the first time, so I'll tell you again. A time is coming, and it's coming very soon, where the Son of Man is going to die. He's going to give his life as a ransom for many. But 3 days later, I will rise again and show you the power of God manifested in my life. But this time, nobody says anything. In the story, if you follow it out, it says the disciples were afraid to ask him any questions. Why? Because they saw what just happened to Peter when Peter had a few questions about it, and they didn't want to be called Satan, right? So they didn't say anything. This is the second time. Instead, what they do as they're making their way from one of those mounts that I showed you on the map, as they're making their way to Capernaum, to their home base, Jesus is walking, he shares this news, and then behind him, they're kind of lagging. And they start to have a discussion of their own. And their discussion is about who's the GOAT. About who's the greatest of all time, meaning among this group. Now, can you imagine, Jesus has just for the second time told them something really critical and very somber. Their leader, their Lord, the Messiah is getting ready to die. And all they can think to do is to have a discussion about which of them is the greatest. Does that sound insane to you? It sounds insane to me too, until I start to think about my own life. And then I think, in my own unguarded, private moments, what I think about when I think about greatness. And this is where I ask you to be honest. Because all of us want to be noticed. All of us want to be admired. All of us want our 15 minutes on some level. We want respect. We want when people to look at us to think greatly of us. We don't want to be ignored. We don't want to be less than. We want to be great. Now, can you imagine the discussion? I mean, it doesn't really say specifically what they're saying to each other. Can you imagine, like, just what they might have been saying to each other? Especially like Peter, James, and John, because they were always like the favorites. Somehow Jesus would always take them to special places where the other 9 would just kind of be relatively close, but they wouldn't actually get to where the 3 would. In fact, they just spent some time with him on the Mount of Transfiguration. They got to witness things that none of the others. And I can imagine Peter bragging about that, or maybe recalling the time that he walked on water until the others reminded him that he also fell in the water. I think he could remind them of when he was named the Rock, right, when he got his nickname, or they might want to remind him of when he got his other nickname, Satan. I could imagine back and forth these guys were going about who and what and greatness looked like. But as silly as that argument and that discussion seems, you have to connect here for a moment with these guys. They're afraid. They have more questions than answers. They're still not really sure what Jesus is talking about. And so they're just human. And so in order not to get themselves in deeper, hotter water and asking questions to Jesus that they don't understand, they just start having a conversation of their own. And it's about which among them is the greatest. And I just want you to connect with them, because I think sometimes that's the kind of discussion that, whether or not we have it with others, that we have in our own head about what constitutes greatness. I think all of us want to be great. And you'll see that Jesus doesn't really castigate them for wanting to be great. He doesn't He doesn't have a problem with the argument. What he has a problem with is the definition. Because their understanding of greatness is self-serving. It's self-promoting. It's self-seeking. But his idea of greatness looks a whole lot different. And so he says to them in Mark chapter 9, he says, when we were traveling down on the road, now that we're in our house in Capernaum, he said, I just have a question for you. He said, what were you guys talking about? Crickets. Total silence, because they're absolutely embarrassed. Jesus knew what they were talking about. He just wanted to see whether they were going to tell him. But they're not going to tell him, because it's not one of their finer moments. And so as he asked them the question, what were you talking about on the road? But they didn't answer, because they had been arguing about which of them was the greatest. He then sat down and called the 12 disciples over to him and said, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. Now, when you were thinking about what constitutes greatness, were you thinking about last place? I don't think about that, right? At least not as often as I should. And then he put a little child among them. And taking the child in his arms, he said to them, anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes not only me, but also my Father who sent me. You see, he is redefining for them, in light of their recent argument, what it means to be great. Now, why would he use a child to make his point? Now, in that day, only parents loved their children, nobody else. Nobody loved kids. They were a pain in the neck. They had no status or standing or privilege or rights. They could do nothing for you. And so when he brings this little child, who just happens to be kind of on the outskirts of their discussion, when he ushers this child into the center of their circle, what he's saying to them is that what it means to be great is to open your circle to people who have no status, no standing, and who can do absolutely nothing for you. If you want to be great, you have to open your arms to even a child. Now, he could have used someone else. He could have used a prostitute or a tax collector or somebody on the margins because of something they had done. It just so happens that he uses a child here. But basically what he's saying is, titles, authority, wealth, 15 minutes of fame, that kind of stuff doesn't really matter to me. And it shouldn't really matter to you if you're going to be a follower of mine. And as they're trying to reflect on the reality of what he's just said, their mind is absolutely blown. Because in that day, the idea of humility was not something to be valued. Humility is a character trait, and I even think that one of you guys said it earlier when we were talking about greatness. Humility was something to be looked down upon. Jesus is the one who elevated the idea of humility as being a character trait that has value. In their day, everything was about the love of honor. Every move in their life was a calculated move towards elevating status. And so when they get to this space, they think to themselves, this kid can't do anything for us. Why in the world would you welcome one and then say to us, if you welcome this child, you're welcoming me. And if you're welcoming me, then you're welcoming my Father. So, does anybody want to be great? Jesus says, greatness comes in how you treat people. who can do absolutely nothing for you. Greatness comes in how you treat those who are less educated than you are. Sometimes with our education, we tend to be haughty, and we think that if you haven't achieved a certain level or stature, that you're somehow less than. We do it with education, we do it with jobs, we do it with our socioeconomic status. But Jesus says, how wide is your circle? Will you welcome the sick, the aged, the ugly, the person who everybody else rolls their eyes at when they go on and on talking about absolutely nothing? Who is that person that stands outside your circle that you just can't welcome? Jesus says, if you want to be great, you have to widen your circle. You have to understand that greatness doesn't come with acclaim and fame and authority and titles. You see, that's what they were hoping. They were hoping that Jesus would upend this Roman nightmare where they were always on the bottom and they were always being told what to do and they were enslaved to somebody else's way of being. They wanted to turn the table so that they could tell people what to do and where to go and how to do it. They loved the crowds. They loved the demon-possessed boys being delivered. They loved the people who were blind being given sight. They loved the people who were deaf being given their hearing back. They loved the raising of the dead. They loved the miracles. They loved the flash. They loved it all. They just didn't like, and you will find as you continue this story, they're going to come to Jesus and say, hey, there are these other guys who are performing miracles in your name. Should we call down lightning on them? They were just people that were in and people that were out. And Jesus says, if you want to be great, everybody's in. If you want to be great, you're going to welcome someone into your life circle that can do absolutely nothing to elevate your status. You're going to take some time and you're going to see them for who they are. You're going to see their greatness even though nobody else does. And you're going to value them and you're going to bless them. Because when you do that, you're actually welcoming me. I am identifying myself with the lowest common denominator of society. If you see them, you see me. We are like one. We are in lockstep. We are in union with one another. And it's very humbling to us because this is what we want to be. This is what we think is the right answer when we hear Jesus teach. We hear Him teach and we say, that sounds so good. And then we leave this place and there's so many other competing values about what greatness looks like in our world that they bring us to a crossroads over and over again. Last week I told you, if you are a follower of Christ, you will inevitably come to a series of crossroads where you will have to make decisions that will ultimately impact the way in which you go and the shape in which your character takes. It will ultimately determine your route, your destination, and your destiny. And so this is one of those crossroads. I wish you could just come to this crossroads once. This is a crossroads you will come to again and again and again. And this is the one where it talks about how you identify greatness. Who is welcome in your world? Who's in and who's out? And Jesus takes the least likely person and elevates this child's status and says to his friends, if you want to be great, you welcome somebody who can do nothing for you. Somebody who's seemingly a waste of your time. Somebody in who your reputation goes down when you're seen with them. And they have to just be sitting in stunned silence. But they have to be thinking to themselves, do I really want to be a follower of this guy? Or just a fan? That when things are going well and the crowds are big, that I just want to tell people, yeah, I'm with him. Or when he's in a place of rejection, when he's in a place where he just finished telling them he's heading for the second time, where he will give his life as a ransom for them and for all, where he will be beaten, where he will be mocked, where he will be crucified. Do you want to follow up close or from a distance? Are you in when things are bad as well as when they're good, or just when they're good? Here comes the crossroads. I want to be great. I was made for greatness. What does it look like? What it looks like is that your circle widens and you welcome people, all people, whether they're pretty, whether they're rich, whether they have authority, whether they can do something for you, you welcome them. Why? Because when you welcome them, you welcome Jesus. And when you welcome Jesus, you welcome His Father. So what kind of room and space in your life do you have for the lost, for the least, for the broken, for the struggling, for the aged, for the young, for the sick, for the addicted, for those who can do little to nothing for you? What kind of space do you have in your personal world? Or are you just too busy trying to become somebody? Become somebody that you already are. See, you have greatness in you. And Jesus wants to call it out by the way in which you treat other people. And I just think, there's a personal application for us, but there's also a corporate application, a communal application. Like, what kind of church do we want to be? What kind of called out community? Like, who's welcome here? Who feels at home here? The answer to the question should be anybody who walks through the doors should be. It doesn't matter what they can do for us. What matters is that they are God's children. And in their own creation, they deeply matter to Him. And if they matter to Him, well then, by proxy, they should matter to us. So some of us are better at this than others of us. I think we're kind of like, if we were to look at it, I think there's a learning curve of some sort. Where as we mature in our relationship with Christ, let's say we start at 0 down here, I think there's a kind of a learning curve of taking on values and character traits that aren't always easy, because those values and character traits kind of are in contradiction to a lot of what you encounter when you leave this place. And so we have to fight against the tide in some ways when we're trying to adopt things that Jesus tells us is good for us. But as I close, I just want to ask you this. It just makes sense to me. So, when you're thinking about the people that you admire, when you're thinking about somebody who inspires you, I mean, yes, there are sort of people like the Tom Bradys where we look at their athletic feats, or movie stars, or people who do something in a field that we value and we appreciate, and we say, wow, that's greatness, and we admire that. We admire that. But when it comes to thinking about people who inspire us on a different level and we want to become like them, who is that person for you? And what are those traits that exist in that person that draw you to want to be like them? And my final word is, I don't tend to be attracted to people who are name droppers, who are patting themselves on the back for their latest and greatest achievement. I don't know about you. I don't tend to be drawn to or inspired by that person. I tend to be drawn to and inspired by the guy or gal who just humbly goes about what they do to the best of their ability. They wake up every day and they quietly seek to live out their greatness. And even if it doesn't work today, they're committed to tomorrow the same path. And as they grow in their walk with Christ, they began to look just a little more like Him. I'm drawn to people whose circle is wide. I don't like to see prejudice in any form. I don't like to see bias. It rubs against the fabric of what Christ is knitting inside of me. It doesn't work well for me. So I'm inspired by people who just get up and go after it. And even if they're only making little progress, they're humbly going about what they do. And that's what I see in Jesus as he begins to define for us greatness. Greatness is about humility. It's not the seeking of glory. It's the seeking of nobility by serving others, by using your power to be a blessing to other people, not by elevating yourself. So if you want to be great, Jesus says, I have no problem with that. I want you to be great too. It's just you have to make sure what your definition is. Because if your definition doesn't align with mine, then really what you are is an admirer of mine, not a follower. But I'm interested in followers. I want you to follow me. Because when you follow me, you bless the world. They see you, they see me. You welcome me. You welcome my Father. You welcome my Father, your life is changed forever. Your world is blessed. The world is blessed. You want to be great? Starts by welcoming people into your life who can do absolutely nothing for you and loving them the way that I love this child. You're going to keep coming to the crossroads about what greatness is. Think about what Jesus says it is and think about what you aspire to, and just make sure if you want to be a follower that you align your way with His. Because that's what it means to be a follower. I'm walking in the way of Christ. I'm going to where He goes. I'm becoming who He is. Otherwise, I'm just playing at it. This is the crossroads we come to again and again and again. I want you to think about that as you think about greatness. Let's pray. Lord, I ask that you would help me to see my own heart in the places where my definition of greatness doesn't align. And I ask that you would continue to grow me and to grow us and to help us really understand greatness in all of the ways that you showed your early disciples. Teach us the value of humility. Teach us the value of a wider circle. Teach us the value of patience. Teach us the value of loving all people at all times, that we would honor you and welcome you into our world and this world. It's in Christ that we pray. Amen.